Hi everyone, this is JelArts. I'm back with another video, and this is the final video for my paint tool side tutorial. It's the coloring portion, so in my other two videos, the one before this, I did this soft line art, which is the way I line art things usually, is softly. And in the one before that, I showed you the setup of paint tool side and how to sketch, basically my recommendations, some useful tools, how to like flip the canvas and stuff like that. So in this one, I'm going to be showing you my method of coloring. So the first thing I'd do, I'd hide the sketch. I'd recommend naming this layer as your line art layer. Lines. And that's its own layer. I'm going to move all my sketches down. I usually like to keep a dark background handy in case I'm going to be coloring in light colors. That way you can easily check to see if you missed any spaces where you're supposed to be coloring. And for the coloring, it's important to consider different like color theory and what colors go well together and what colors you should use and why they go well together and how to shade them with the colors that are going to make them look the best. So the first thing I do for coloring is get down your base colors. So I'm going to start with a skin tone. So I'm going to put my dark background up, and I use my brush tool to fill in. It's just, I find it very soft if you set down the density, so like that, I'm going to use this. The density is at like 94, and my size, the brush size depends on the canvas size, so that's not a very useful piece of information if your canvas size is different from mine. So to modify color, say this isn't the skin tone you wanted, you're realizing, but you just filled the whole thing in. An easy way, go up here, filter, hue, and saturation. And this window changes. You'll have hue, saturation, luminescence, so the hue basically changes the color throughout the whole spectrum. Saturation makes it super vivid or dulls it down to a gray. And the luminescence brightens it or dulls it down to black. So basically it takes it closer to white and brings it down to black, depending on which way you go. So I might lower the luminescence, up the saturation a bit maybe, make it a bit more red, like that. Press OK. And under filter there's brightness and contrast. So I'm going to lower the brightness a little bit. The contrast basically increases the contrast between the colors. This is the color deepen. This is kind of the color I was going for. The one way to color it in was just simply taking a brush and filling it in. But there's another method of coloring which can be very useful, especially if your line art has no gaps in it. Above your layers, there's something called selection source. When you click that, it's going to go green. And that basically means if you have any of your tools over here set to selection source, it's only going to color in that layer. So it's using that layer as like a sampling layer, but you're actually drawing in a separate layer. It's kind of hard to explain, but hopefully this will make more sense. The lines layer is set to selection source. Go to your paint bucket and it'll be on working layer, but then click selection source. So it's going to fill in on this layer as if it's in the line work layer. And hopefully this will work. Yeah. So you click and it takes that layer as its line art, but it puts it in a layer of your choosing. So I'm just going to continue to fill that in. So that's how you do selection source. And it's really useful if you have very clean line art. You can fill it in pretty easily. I usually keep it on transparency strict, and the higher you make, I'm just going to erase this, the higher you make the number, the less strict it is, and it will go outside the lines more easily. And if you put it at 0, it's very strict with where it selects. So you can also put it on color difference, but that basically means it's not going to fill according to transparency, it's going to fill according to what color you're selected on. But transparency is the way to go for line art. But I'm going to continue filling this in the by hand method. I think I want her to have some blue hair. I wonder if that will work. Not that blue. I'm going to see if I can do it the paint bucket method and see if that'll speed this up a bit. And see how it kind of leaves holes right there. There's a bunch of gaps in the line art. That's because I set my transparency on the paint bucket to like 0, the transparency difference that it takes. So if I set it higher and fill it again, it's going to fill more. It's going to accept more as its area, and when you zoom in, there's not as many gaps. So it depends on what your line art looks like to how high you should have that set. But if you try to see, it's best to have it as high as you can while it's still being able to fill the area and not go outside the lines. That's the best way to do it. And then you just want to examine your coloring for any gaps it might have. So now I shall color her eyes. I don't color the eyes themselves a pure white because I don't think it's necessarily a pure white, so I'll do like a light gray, like this. I'm making a new layer for every color I'm doing here. I keep the lips and the skin and the eyebrows all on the same layer. Actually, the hair layer, I should color the eyebrows the same color as the hair, because that's how it is in real life. For the most part, anyway. I'm sure if you dyed your hair blue in real life, your eyebrows wouldn't actually be blue unless you dyed them. So I'm going to make her eyes brown, kind of a darkish brown. And coloring your line art before you color can actually help to soften your drawing if that's what you're looking for. But if you want a big impact in contrast, you want it to be black line art, or whatever color you want to do, but black line art can offer more of a contrast. Forgot to fill that there. So now that my base colors are down, I'm gonna start shading. So the way I shade is I go to the layer. So I'm going to start with the skin, and I'm going to preserve opacity, so that basically means I can only color on what I've already drawn in that layer. I eyedrop the color of the skin, and skin has a lot of different colors in it. It has red, purple, and green, kind of. It's composed of those, and the green is more of like the highlights, and the red and purple are like, I think the purple are like the shadows, and skin is like red pigmented on it. But of course you're not actually going to make it purple, red, and green, but it's going to be, just keep that in mind, like there's a broad spectrum of colors. So you eyedrop the skin color, and I go over to the colors here and I move it down diagonally, and I move this color. I always move it. You always want to shade with different hues of the same color family, so you don't eyedrop this, make it dark, and then shade with that, because that looks very kind of flat almost. And it makes a big difference if you eyedrop it, lower the color, and change the hue, because then it just kind of brings it to life a bit more. But for this one I probably want to add a little bit of purple in there, just by lightly going over top of it. My light source is going to be coming, I should probably mention the light source. I'm going to have it coming from up here, shining down, back to the coloring. And since the light source is there, it's going to cast a shadow down there. I'm going to lower the color again, change the hue a little bit. It's looking a little bit too red for my taste, so I'm going to move it back up. These are just the basic shadows I'm dropping in here. Like the shading on the eyelids makes a big difference. Shading under the nose, shading along the bottom of the nose, and I can't remember what that part's called on your face where it's like the indent above your lip. I can't quite remember the name of that, but shade there. and her forehead is where the light is going to be hitting. So I'd shade under her lips here. Shade, the neck always needs shading on the opposite side from the light. Down here, shade there because on the collarbone it's going to be lit up a bit. And one thing that can really help make the colors pop is, see on her shoulder here how I have colored the whole thing dark because the light's coming from the other direction. You go back in with a lighter color and add a bit of reflected light on the other side, and it just makes it stand out and pop a bit more. It just adds more dimension to your drawing. Just a useful tip you might want to try depending if there is reflected light. I just personally think that it visually makes it look better. So the beginning stages of coloring, I'm just loosely blocking in the shadows. The shadows seem a little bit more red than I'd like them to be, so I'm gonna modify that. And for the cheeks can be tricky to color, so I like to shade, especially, so the light's coming from the top, so I'll shade down here lightly, and here as well on the side of her nose here, and the lip, and shade all there, so that area is darker, and maybe darken the bottom a bit more. The cheeks kind of are lit up in a triangle. So you eyedrop the skin color, take a slightly lighter color, and move the slider up here more towards green. And make it kind of big. You might even want to use the airbrush for this. And put the highlight there. I'm just going to add it to her nose and her other cheek while I'm at it. And then I blend it out, and also I'd put it on her eyelid here. It looks a little too harsh right now, so I'm just gonna take the edge off of that. I'm gonna add some reflected light to the bottom of her jaw. It just makes it pop a bit more. Add some to the bottom of her nose. Adding reflected light to the nose really helps it to look better. Reflected light is very important. Basically means the light that is coming from objects that are hit by the light, but it's reflecting off that and hitting other objects, so it's kind of like a second light source, but it's caused by the original light source. Adding a bit of shading here. I don't know how helpful this is going to be. This is just the thoughts that go through my head as I shade. And I hope I'm not under-explaining anything or over-explaining anything. I'm going to add some highlights here. So since the light's coming slightly from that side, that one side of her face is more illuminated than the other side. I'm going to add a highlight to her forehead, a highlight to her shoulder, not her shoulder bones, her collarbones, and this part here. This is still very rough shading, but it kind of gives you the general idea of where to place shadows in this kind of light source. You might even want to soften up her eyelid here and blend in the highlights on her eyelids like that. Some of this could be technically wrong, but for the style and everything, that's how I do it. Now for the lips, I'm going to zoom in a bit. So I find lips very challenging. It's just something I find challenging. I find the color hard to get right. I find the highlights hard to get right. And it can never quite look the way I want it to. So I always end up undershading or overshading it, which is, I just find them kind of a pain. I like to draw them, but it's just shading in color is what I find hard. I also find shoulders and torsos very difficult. But let's do a little highlight in the middle of her lips at the bottom. And usually the darker lip is the darker lip. Usually the upper lip is darker than the bottom lip in this scenario. We're going to take a bit of color from her skin tone to just help pull it together. I'm not going to overdo the lips here. I'm actually going to color the liner to look more like the lips and to blend it in like that. Still very rough. All of this is very rough for the sake of the tutorial. At the end I'm going to sharpen it up in time lapse, and maybe I'll do a little voiceover while I'm sharpening it up. So now I'm going to talk about layer modes. So in regards to the hair, another way of coloring is to color on top, like in layers above the original layer. So you make a new layer and you press clipping group, and that means it's only gonna, whatever you draw in that layer, it's gonna clip to the layer below it, so it'll only show where you drew before on that layer. So if I draw on this layer, it's only gonna show on the blue, but I can still make it invisible like that. So for color theory, kind of, you eyedrop the color. I like to move it down like this, and since we're going to be using the multiply, I like to change the color drastically. So I moved it over very far and go into mode multiply, and that basically makes the color appear darker. So I'm going to lower the opacity a bit so it's not so harsh, like that. I just lost my original color, so I need to redo that. So multiply, move it down, and that should be good. And now you can just color on that layer on multiply, and it creates shading over top of the original layer. I'm just putting in the shadows where the light wouldn't hit as much as the other areas. Oh, I'm so used to eyedropping the original color that I just lost the color I was using. Maybe I'll put it in my swatches over here. That's the color. Multiply, lower it again. It's about good. So keep on. You can erase it to change the shadow itself. I like to add more strands with the shading than with the line art. This helps it to look softer and more unified, I guess. So I'm just indicating some highlights, sort of, with the shadows. This isn't how I normally shade, but those are just like basic shadows drop down. I'm going to merge the multiply with the one below it by pressing this layer, merge down layer, and now it's all one layer. I'm going to make a new layer above it, press clipping group, and put it on luminosity, and luminosity basically makes it glow. So I'm going to select that. I like to make it kind of like a yellowy light, lowering the opacity again because it's kind of bright. I'm just going to use the airbrush and just make it brighter where I want it to be brighter. I might even use overlay. Overlay makes it more vivid, so I'm going to see about that. Yeah, I like the way this looks better. Okay, I'm gonna merge that down now. And blend it out. So my process is I will eyedrop a color by clicking the eyedrop button on my tablet pen, which is, I think it's the right click, as I go. So I'll eyedrop, I'll stroke it a little bit, do a couple strokes, and eyedrop again to select a new color, do more strokes with that color, and I just kind of keep on going. I keep repeating that process as I go. Might want to add some darker shading down here, so I'm going to move that down diagonally, move this up towards the green. Not quite like that. Maybe I'll move it the other direction. Yeah, I'm going to eyedrop that there on the end where it kind of gets lighter. Grab the right color. Yeah. This is kind of not too detailed tutorial because I'm coloring everything. If I was just coloring the skin, I would show you more tips on how to color the skin. But this is just basically my settings and how I work and my techniques on how I do it. How I color everything and just my process. So I blended out a lot using the pen, not using the pen, using the brush tool, and eyedropping the colors as I go. So now for the whites of the eyes, I'm going to press Preserve Opacity, and I like to shade it with a grayish purple or blue, not actually gray, because if you use a color, it just looks more vivid, more alive, and it works better with everything else if you use a color. Using just gray is kind of boring, but you can do that. But I would recommend using more of a purple or blue or brown to shade the eyes. And the irises, I like to follow the shading of the eye, so keep it dark where the white of the eye is dark, and put a bit of a highlight at the bottom. I don't really do anything too fancy with the eyes, but I'll go above my line work layer and add a highlight up like this. I'm going to redo that. Add a highlight up there. Like that. And I'll go in a little bit more detail with thinner lines here. And bring down the shadow a bit more. And once I'm at this stage, once I've got everything, the base colors of everything, and where I want all the highlights to be, I'm just going to add some highlights on the hair right here, where the light's hitting. Some reflected light highlights. Just final touch-ups before I merge everything together, and then I blend it all together, and I soften everything and add all the shadows and blend it all. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to merge it all. Usually I'd make a copy of this first in case it didn't turn out. But here's the whole thing all merged together, and I just go through and color over it as one layer. It just helps me bring everything together, a more unified look, and soften out any of the line art spots that I didn't like before. And I sometimes will blend the line art color into the colors, so I'll blend the brown into parts and just make it all work together. So I'm going to go into time lapse while I do this and show you the final result at the end.